I think we should get going, everyone. So I hope that everyone is having a good morning. Bienvenue à tous. Welcome to PPX's latest webinar. And just to be sure that we're all in the right webinar, I'm going to just mention that the purpose of the webinar is to talk about COVID-19 impacts on government department operations and how results-based management techniques are helping departments to manage through some of the challenges that they have been facing. There's likely going to be some particular focus points on some of the discussions that you're going to hear, and probably some other things that you will think of as we go through, but we hope that you're going to find that this is going to be an interesting session. Our format today is we have two guest speakers, and each of them will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. They will have slide presentations, and by the way, these presentations will be made available to you all after the session in both English and French. I also want to mention that the session is going to be recorded, and also that we welcome and encourage your comments and questions and answers. Please use the Zoom Q&A function in order to do that. You can certainly chat, use the chat function to talk amongst yourselves, but we would like you to use the Q&A function so that I and my colleagues can make sure that we get your questions addressed promptly. So I also wanted to mention that we will, at the end, be asking you to complete an evaluation form, because the Planning and Performance Exchange is always interested in improvement, and I'm sure you will have ideas not only to improve this kind of webinar, but ideas for other kinds of topics, but we'll come back to that. So without further ado, I'm going to first briefly introduce our two guest speakers. Paul Labbé is the Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategy and Engagement at Shared Services Canada. And today also we have Anne Routier, who is Director General Planning, Delivery and Results at Natural Resources Canada. And let me first introduce Paul, who will be our first speaker. Paul is, as I said, ADM of Strategy and Engagement. She works with colleagues in order to ensure that the Government of Canada's digital vision becomes an operational reality. She's had a very varied career in the public service, ranging from tax policy and administration at finance and at the Canada Revenue Agency, to policy development, strategy and planning and results at Health Canada at TBS. Over her career, she's had the opportunity and been a business owner for a number of government-wide applications, such as the MAP portal and the Executive Talent Management System. And with that, she has gained an appreciation of the technological and human challenges in delivering user-centric digital services. Paul's background, she has a Bachelor of Economics from McGill and a Master's of Business Admin from the University of Ottawa. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Paul. Welcome.
Thank you, Art. I'm surprised you didn't mention that I also used to be a member of the board of PPX way back when.
Thank you.
Something I am actually quite proud of. Alors, bonjour tout le monde. C'est un plaisir d'être ici ce matin. I'm to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is how results-based management is actually helping Shared Service Canada achieve its objectives. So I can't see the presentation, but I'm assuming we're on slide 1, right? So just as in terms of context, SSC was created 10 years ago, and its objective was to consolidate and operate essentially the Government of Canada network and telecommunications, the IT infrastructure that essentially all the departments rely on to operate. You know, fun fact, the Government of Canada has the largest wide area network in the country. What we do is very, very big and very, very broad. And, you know, as a result, SSC has played a crucial role in accelerating the government's digital vision. So before we talk about sort of the pandemic, I want to, you know, pre-pandemic, you know, SSC has gone through a lot of transformation. Many of you who were around 10 years ago know that the early years were a little rough, and they have gotten better. And in 2019, the organization actually launched kind of a strategic vision that we call SSC 3.0. And it was really about taking an integrated approach to managing the government's IT. And, as many of you know well, results-based management works best when there's sort of a strategic vision guiding an organization. And so the 3.0 vision, identified kind of key transformation priorities. The first one was kind of the network and security and increasing the reliability and secure nature of our network. Working on collaboration tools, making sure the public servants actually had access to, the best tools out there for collaboration. Paying attention to application health and modernization. This is sort of helping departments take their applications, things like the EI system, and modernize them and transport them onto, sort of modern infrastructure. And then overall, just sort of helping the government of Canada move forward towards an enterprise approach to managing the IT infrastructure. C'est vraiment grâce à la perspective d'entreprise que SPC était bien placé pour livrer les services durant la pandémie. One of the things that SSC 3.0 and really the management at SSC focused on was data collecting and reporting. It was a weak point. It's still not, I'd say that's super strong, but it keeps getting better in many ways because we, in 2020, we had a data strategy. We created an enterprise data repository. It's been a central source for most data sets that we used to, inform our decision making during the pandemic. So I'll move to slide 2. This is where it's worth casting ourselves back about a little over a year and remember how far we've traveled. In response to the pandemic, work from home order came into effect, and most public servants, myself included, tens of thousands of us started working entirely from home. And that meant that our digital workspace actually became our primary workspace. But if you were like me, this meant those first few weeks meant very little network access, and often a busy signal if you're trying to dial into one of those many, many teleconference calls that were being held. And that was because the surge in demand just put unprecedented, kind of strain on the government networks and bandwidth and remote access capabilities and other services that essentially we all rely on. But the fact that, as a result of SSC 3.0, some work had the groundwork had been done to sort of focus on those areas. And as a result, the organization was able to kind of pivot and meet the extraordinary demand for IT systems and capabilities. And we did that actually by accelerating a number of things that we had already started as part of SSC 3.0. And we use data and reporting to support the critical services for departments. So as daily reports were being generated about the surge in networks, we work with departments to set priorities and to monitor kind of the daily progress that was made in each category with each department. So there was a lot of very close work with our departments and a lot of, sort of war room meetings looking at data and what was happening out there in order to make sure that we were able to support the government, especially for a lot of the new initiatives that were being rolled out. So one of the things more specifically, when we think of March and April, the demand for citizens facing and internal digital services surged to levels that weren't seen. And we can talk about what we achieved largely because we have the metrics for it. And this talks a little bit about the whole idea of results. So I'm going to share some numbers with you because they really are to some degree quite eye-opening. Prior to the pandemic, approximately 20,000 public servants would access the network remotely on a typical day. Now we actually are able to have 300,000 government employees working from home. And not only that, but they're able to do it through a secure remote access, which means that you're not out there on the bandwidth, but it's actually secure capacity. The teleconference calls, grew from 1.6 million teleconference calls a day to 5 million per day. And then let's talk about the tools that were provided, Microsoft Teams, which is really how most of us are working today, rather than, I mean, I can't even imagine what working from home for this last year would have been like if we had all been working on teleconferences and couldn't see people's faces and people couldn't put their hand up when they wanted to speak and the likes. MS Teams, essentially pre-pandemic, SSE had been working with departments on a phased rollout of a newly procured suite of MS 365 tools. So this is where luck counts, in the sense that we actually had the procurement vehicle in place and we had the contracts in place. And it meant that we just adjusted the time frame for this rollout from months to days and weeks. And we're able to go from a few piloted departments to a full rollout to 40 departments. And we now have approximately 190,000 users of MS Teams. And then we also increased the bandwidth available to employees by more than 50% to increase the reliability of the network. But one thing I do want to say, it's not just the fact that we increased our bandwidth. Looking at the numbers, knowing what the capacity was, we were able to make some risk-based decisions as well, right? The pandemic kind of led to a certain degree of risk management, where we were looking at the risk of not executing became more important than other risks out there. And one of the things that we had also been working on in the context of the sort of SSE 3.0 and the network was looking at something, and this is a kind of a more of a technical word, what's called split tunneling. And split tunneling is actually the way many of you are working whenever you are on Teams. So you have a VPN, it gets you into the Government of Canada network, where you have access to all your files and the like. But MS Teams has so much bandwidth that when you're actually on MS Teams, you are not on a government network, you are on a different network. There are certain things we did and we knew we were going to have to do because we started seeing the numbers, and you had to do a recalibration of risk based on those. So having an enterprise approach was also something that was crucial to meeting these challenges. In many ways, SSC being existing and having responsibility for the network did allow the Government of Canada to work sort of at scale and at speed in a way that it would have been very difficult to do otherwise. But that isn't to say that everything we had was brand new. There's still a lot of very old infrastructure out there, and we did pay attention to those and we did roll those out. And the example will be the 1-800 hotline that was used by Global Affairs and CBSA to assist Canadians returning home. There's just a lot of work that did go on. But it was really by having strong performance indicators and measurement that both we were able to manage through the crisis, and I'm actually able to tell the story. So let's go to slide 3. So in terms of looking forward, the government response to the pandemic has proven that, a strong collaborative enterprise-wide approach to the management of IT was critical to our ongoing shared success. SPC poursuit ses efforts pour renforcer l'infrastructure et les services de technologie pour le gouvernement. Puis on sert des données et de la mesure de rendement pour favoriser la transformation. But one thing to bear in mind, though, is that the work that SSC does is just a small part of digital government. While we spend about $2 billion on IT a year, all the departments collectively spend much, much more, many more times than that. And the decisions of individual departments as they are kind of building their applications to go on our system or doing various things have a broad impact on the overall system. And so we actually are using performance measures and data to engage with our departmental clients. We use measures to talk to deputy ministers and to CIOs across government, and sometimes to raise their awareness of the state of their own applications. A recent missive that went out was talking to deputies and CIOs about landlines. We have a whole lot more landlines that we will never need because just about everyone has a cell phone now. That's costing the Government of Canada a lot of money. And we're able to use measures and metrics as a way of starting a conversation and sensitizing them to the need for them to take action. So we monitor the system, but we also let them know what they can do to help us manage the load of the network. So, data and performance is, not only got us through the COVID and the pandemic, but is something that we are using on an ongoing basis to engage with our clients. And, one of the things I would say is, and this is from my experience, when people start getting used to data and they start using data for the decision-making and the confirmation, it creates an increasing demand for it. And that's certainly what we are seeing with regards to the work we are doing. So we have learned, and we knew already, but I'd say that this last year has kind of driven home how important having performance measures and information can help us align government priorities and help us not only meet emerging and urgent needs, but also drive the system forward and help us kind of project into the future. Alors ça, c'est ma présentation. J'espère que j'ai pas pris trop de temps. J'ai hâte d'entendre ce que Anna a à dire. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Paul. Prochain, j'aimerais introduire Anne Routier. Anne is in charge of the Planning, Delivery, and Results branch in the Strategic Policy and Innovation sector at NRCan. She's also the head of performance measurement for NRCan. Her branch is responsible for strategic planning, risk monitoring, departmental reporting, and performance measurement. And she also supports the department's sustainable development strategy. Before NRCan, she worked for several years at the Treasury Board Secretariat and supported the policy and results, the policy and evaluation, and the Center of Excellence for Evaluation in the expenditure management sector. And I will not be remiss this time in saying that she has also been a past director on the PPX board of directors. So thanks for that, Paul. So without further ado, over to you, Anne.
Merci beaucoup, Art. As you know, it's always a pleasure to be part of the PPX family, to be back chatting with everybody. As Zelda, who's part of my team, is putting our presentation for this morning, we're preparing, as it indicated here, and the announcement for the webinar. I'll be sharing with you our integrated approach to monitoring and reporting impact of NRCan COVID-19 measure. But before doing that, I'd like again, Art, to thank you for this invitation, to share our story about how we are using results, preparing to collect information to report on COVID-19. And I really invite everybody who's part of our conversation, that as you'll hear about our journey, to join our conversation, because my experience is that we never finish with improving our monitoring and reporting approach, as also Paul was explaining. And Paul, just quickly, a big thank you for everything you've been doing, because frankly, without your department, we would not be here probably today reporting on all those efforts that we've been able to continue to be connected within government as we do our work. So if we could go to slide 2 of the presentation, I'd like to explain to you a bit the purpose of our discussion today that I'd like to present. So about a year ago, in May 2020, the NRCan Performance Measurement Evaluation and Experimentation Committee endorsed an approach for ensuring that our department would be well positioned to report on the results and the impact of the COVID-19 measure that we are putting in place in the department in the short, medium, and long term. So to do that, it was important that we do not do this in silo, but actually we put together an internal COVID results task team co-chaired by our branch and in the strategic policy and innovation sector, but working also very closely to with the audit and evaluation branch. And we create that task team to implement action in support of our initiative to again really planning well how we would monitor the impact of all those initiatives that are in place. So I'm taking a second to acknowledge also the very good work done by Zelda Yule, who's part of my team, but also Stephanie Kalt in the Audit and Evaluation branch at NRCan. And it was really a task team effort, so various participants from our sector at NRCan. Comme vous le savez, dans notre monde de la gestion des résultats, souvent quand on parle d'évaluer l'impact de nos initiatives, on pense en termes de programme. So we're thinking in terms of program. But as we were preparing to assess the whole departmental effort, we realized that we need to go much broader to provide really the comprehensive story of our NRCan, if I can say, COVID effort. So this is why today I'll take a few minutes to talk to you about our approach to define our inventory of NRCan COVID-19 measures. Alors, notre approche pour définir notre inventaire d'initiatives reliées à notre effort de COVID. I will talk to you about our task team, what they did to review the information we have available, and then identified and discover our various gaps in our reporting and measurement. As well as then what we're completing developing in terms of our results framework to assess this impact and what will be our plan to collect more information. So if I could go to the slide 3 now of our presentation. So you see here in a summary that in our assessment to create a sound performance measurement framework and be comprehensive about our effort, we needed to have a good understanding of NRCan tangible and I would say intangible efforts to address COVID-19 and this at various phases of our effort. From at the time of our emergency response, during the stabilization phase, right after this crisis when we discovered what COVID was about, and then the period we are in terms of our recovery phase. So for example, as you see under emergency response, in addition to a new program, like our program for safety measure for small and medium enterprise in the forest sector, this program was announced last July to assist offsetting costs associated with COVID-19 safety measures. This program was again created specifically to help the forest. We needed to also account for other internal and external facing activity, correct? Like, as I've said, we often just think of program and what we want to assess in terms of the impact, but there was a lot more going on in the department internally and also externally with our various stakeholders. So for example, our branch was involved, as we indicate on the slide, in various horizontal and sector-specific support activity during the emergency response. I'm just going to name a few for you to give you some illustrations. So we provided federal geospatial data, expertise, and infrastructures to PHAC, to help them tracking the COVID situation. We provide assistance to transport medical professionals in the remote indigenous community because NRCan has programs across the country. There was also direct provisions of some protective equipment given the work we do in our labs, and we were able to step up and provide that equipment. Then there is all the work, the analytical work that is done by our analysts. So supporting the development of guidelines for public health measures to protect works and communities in the natural resource sectors. And then you can imagine all the work around data analysis and engagement with stakeholders to inform about the federal response measure that exists. Similarly, during the stabilizations and recovery period, again, you see that we have programs that were created, and I named, the Emissions Reduction Fund program that was announced last October that assists to reduce the GHG emissions by adopting greener technology and help maintain jobs as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. But in addition to that, correct, there was also a lot of activities to stabilize just internally within NRCan our operations, very much, what Paul described, across all organizations. We had also to track internally and support and ensure our business continuity. And then the planning around to support as many of you who may be on the call and from different departments to plan for our reentry measures, correct, as well as we were advancing during the COVID period. There is also naturally a lot of modifications that needs to take place to our existing program because there was a slowing of our economic activities. So our programs officers were looking at how they could extend the durations and the provision of funds. So a lot of activity again to stabilize, correct, the economy through what we exist, but we have to take that into account when we're looking at the contribution of our effort with our various initiatives. And then naturally, there was all this engagement and policy development activity to support the better understanding with our stakeholders about the challenge facing us in the natural resources sector. So in designing generally our results framework to assess our impact of all those initiatives, we were mindful to include NRCan activities and outputs that were directed to the internal management of our organizations, but also those activities required to support our natural resources sector. So to do that assessment of what we know and what we had available, I go to slide 4, where I'm giving there an illustrations of our various reports that were happening, correct, already across the organizations. And, to make a parallel to what Paul was just presenting to you, we had our dashboard also internally, in terms of our return to work and monitoring everything that was done internally and having regular reporting internally about our operations. And we were also doing some pulse check survey, correct, with our employee to see what was there. So again, just have a better sense about the activity around and then what was being happening within the organizations. There was also, regular reporting done by our financial groups around the tracking of expenditure that relate to the delivery of our various service and programs supporting directly the COVID effort. And then there was actually, as we know, because of the Emergency Management Act, some also assessments and lessons learned just to track our, response to emergency situation. You see more on the right of the slides or the screen, if I should say. Also, the whole tracking of decisions that happens in the different sectors that was also very interesting. So we could see again the impact of our measures and some of the decisions, and as well as some of the snapshots that were developed on the sectoral basis, correct, to track the developments and the and what was happening in the natural resources sector. So really, then assessing the impact of our measure, but what was the situations in the sector. So when we looked at all that, correct, you could tell yourself, why do you need to do more? But it was very clear with all this information as the task team was doing this work, that there was a need so that we would be doing a much better integrations of all this information. Then to be really able to tell about NRCan, performance story. So if I go to slide 6, no, we don't have a slide 6. So let's go to slide 5 first. That would be better. In here, what you see, is our approach to do that assessment. So the results framework that we have developed that will build on, the reporting aspect I was just mentioning, but that will assist to be a bit more structured, correct, in assessing the effort of, and the impact of our NRCan operation, the aspect of our coordinations and engagement with stakeholders, as well as the policy development, in addition to the program. So important for us, as we think of how we're going to report and assess and then take lessons from our effort, to think about what it means at the immediate, intermediate, and longer term level, correct? Because to tell our story, we feel with the different report that we have a good understanding of this first year, correct, of the pandemic. But then it's important as we continue to assess this impact and take lessons for other crisis like this one to prepare for it. So what you see more at the bottom of the slide, correct, is as we're preparing to assess the impact of those various initiatives, how to ensure that our management was effective in this crisis, how we have mitigated the impact of COVID-19, and how we have also assist to increase the capacity of other departments who were working, other organizations who were working of the natural resources sector. We need to really complete and integrate that information. And what I want to show you around that circle at the bottom that shows the what surround the results framework is that it's important that above and beyond doing the results framework is how we're going to strategize, if I can say, to make sure that we'll be successful, correct, in our assessment. It will be important that with this information that we know that exists, given the various reports that I was mentioning to you on the previous slides, and the information we know that that is tracked in the program, to see whether there will be sufficient measure to go beyond this immediate impact assessment and what would be the intermediate and longer term aspect. But in doing that, this is the what. There is also the how that is important, correct? So for us now, it's clear as we've been working with our various partners in the sector, the importance, and then as Art says, like I'm thinking in my role of head of performance measurement, to ensure that in our effort, we need to better integrate our data system, data collections, and data approach, right? So important as we do this framework, that there is a clear data management protocol to ensure that we have access and sharing of that information. That we have, and we try to be much better as not being dispersed within the department, but maybe working right now before we're too far from this crisis, to have a central repository of our information where it's collected, and then be clear in terms of the reporting requirements at this time, because we know that often we enunciate, plan to measure, but then in my experience, everything is about implementation, because like Paul says, correct, with this information that was shared through the various reports, correct? There is decisions that were made, and as you were having data, people were using the data, and it was helping to do much better plan. But now we have to continue to do that effort, to continue to assess, the extent of our impact, and then be sure that we have a cohesive story in our reporting. So I think with me losing my voice, it's time for me to stop talking. But I just want to share you a few closing remarks. As we're thinking of our more longer term, and also how actually we think that maybe COVID and what we experience with COVID, that there could be some accelerating trends in assessing the impact. I tell you, just talking to you visually, virtually, today is maybe an illustration of one of this impact. It's important that when we think forward, that we continue to be disciplined as we implement our approach for measurement, that we're reasonable. Because again, there is a lot of information, but we want to make sure that the information we'll be collecting and using to inform our decision will be reasonable. So then there is not a fatigue that comes, but there's really utility in terms of what we continue to monitor. And this is why I'm very pleased that our performance area is working closely with the evaluation area in that undertaking. And then for me is lead our team to thinking that we have durable approach in collecting the information through our various mechanisms already existing. So not to add new necessary requirement through new ways, but maybe try to integrate more this assessment of this COVID impact through regular mechanism. And I'm going to mention a few familiar to some of you, like the performance information profiles we collect on program, or the various reporting, correct, that is already in place. And then we see and assess how long it's good to maintain, and then to take stock of those. Alors voilà, Art. I think it was a bit, the summary of our effort that I want to share with your group today, and would look forward for engagement on what we've done.
Thanks, Anne. Two interesting presentations from our guest speakers, I think, covering a lot of territory. So I imagine that our audience probably has a number of questions and perhaps some comments on what they have heard and seen. I'm seeing some things rolling in here, some through Q&A format, some through chat. Please try and use the Q&A format, but I'll try and deal with them all as we go through. So just maybe in order here. Okay, a question about the upcoming round of departmental results reports. And I'm not sure whether or not Paul and Anne, you can answer for the central agencies on this, or whether or not the guidance is already out. But the extent to which you are on a path towards preparing the next round of DRRs. The question is, how is the response to COVID expected to be reported? So I'll leave it to you to make any comments or how you'd like to respond to that one. And Paul?
So I mean, to the extent that the departmental report, is about the reporting to Parliament on how the department has achieved its objectives for Canadians. I think that I haven't seen any guidance from central agency, and I don't have no line of sight with regards to what it is, but I think the reporting is going to be a little different this year for many of us, although it's going to depend a lot on the mandate of the organization and the role it had to play in the response to COVID. And just about every department has had a very big part of the response to COVID. So for us, I mean, Shared Service Canada, I think it's going to be fairly straightforward in that, our departmental results framework is about delivering sort of IT services to departments. So if anything, one of the things it has made us take a look at is, the performance measures we have right now, and are they the ones who actually tell the story of what we achieved? I think that COVID sort of allowed us to zero in on those. Not to say that we are going to be using the performance indicators we've had, but I think in the narrative there's going to be a little bit more. And I think that any department, whether it's ESDC, is going to have a lot to say about the narrative with respect to what was done. There was extraordinary outcomes, if you want, as well as explanations for certain things that may not have met their objectives. I think it's, in terms of, I know for myself, we're going to be using it, as we have every year, as, with the lens of what do we want to tell parliamentarians about what we achieved. That's it.
Thanks, Paul. Anne, do you wish to comment?
Well, I think very much along the lines of Paul, like we don't have specific guidance that have been issued, but my expectations, given the years of reporting we've been doing in the DR, like we'll have to explain how have been our year of work activity and how it has influenced, the outcome of our program. But as I was explaining in our presentation, is like the importance to reflect also what happened internally, because it was quite an undertaking. And then, as Paul says, like we know that we had put target as an example in previous departmental plan, and then some will have been been impacted very likely, and we'll have to explain why. And some of those would be because of what the situations has happened. Because especially for us in the natural resources sector, you're all aware, correct, how the forestry, the mining, and then the various energy areas have been impacted, in the economic recovery. So naturally, there will be our stories, and as much as we can, we'll look at what was our indicator and explain how they have been impacted. But our effort now is to continue to look at sometimes where there have been, modifications, sometimes of, some of the implementations of the term and condition, because the reality was there where the service delivery could not happen as planned, correct? So then we look at how we could, extend some of the funding or look at the durations of some of the agreements. So then the continuity could come. I gave an illustrations of one of our emergency program. Again, it was to assist the sector, the forestry sector, to manage the increasing costs, around these safety measure to continue their activity. So as Paul said, I think it's going to be a combination of story to illustrate that. And this is why it was important for our task team to look already at all the reporting. So it was not just at the time of the DRR that we would say, oh, what did we do, correct? So we've been continuously gathering that information. And as Paul said, I think it's to inform the decisions and in my view is start to preparing, correct? So that we're more integrated, we're more disciplined without being too heavy on the collection of information.
Thanks, Anne. Here's another one from one of our audience participants, and it's both a comment and a question. Essentially, what is being said here is that from their experience in the public service in the area of planning and performance reporting, one of the most important challenges about these kinds of processes, I presume we're talking about planning performance reporting, is that they're mainly used to quote unquote feed the beast at the Treasury Board, and are not being really used by departmental management to drive real decisions. So would either of you like to comment on that? And maybe, I don't know, in doing so, just refer to, I think you did, but refer to the tangible decision that your departmental management took that were driven by your performance frameworks, particularly in the time of COVID.
Do you want to jump in?
No,
Sure.
you can go first. You go first this time. I'll go second after.
Okay, that's very good. Okay, it's a good agreement. Yeah, you know what? I'm a bit sad that we continue to say that it's a feed the beast exercise. And I think this is what I'm trying very hard with my teams to change, correct, in our approach. And I think, Paul, this is exactly what you were explaining. There is a lot of information we're collecting. And I think it's our responsibility in the planning area and the performance area to make sure that it's quality, naturally, useful and use information. So this is why I was trying to allude in my presentation, the importance to be intelligent, correct, about what we're collecting and what we're using. But I've seen, I think like Paul, you were mentioning, senior management, the deputies really looking at the information, discussing it, and making decisions around it. And also requesting, this information further to have follow-ups and make it important. And I think for me, this is why it's important. And this is why I saw the value of this task team of all our partners in our various sectors, that when we are completing our results framework to ensure that the measure that we are looking at, using to report, but also asking to continue to collect will bring value, correct, to not just us as a planning and reporting shop, if I can say, but also with our program official. So this is why I think the importance of assessing what exists now, identify what else could be there, but not develop too long of a list. Je pense que malheureusement, souvent, c'est quand on arrive avec une trop longue liste de choses we feed the beast. Am I okay? Are you okay?
Yeah.
So I think for us is to be, how can I say, critical in what we decide to maintain and produce dashboard. But in my last slide, I don't know if you saw, but the whole aspect of visualization, I think like Paul, you illustrate well with your presentation. When we bring those numbers and we show trends, there is interest. And I think as part of my responsibility as a head of performance measurement and then in the reporting area to make sure that we bring this back and then that it forms, Canadians, parliamentarians intelligently about the effort we've been doing. And that's a bit the genesis of our own, initiative now to measure this impact.
Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also sort of saddened to hear that perspective. I do think that depending on the mandate of the department, it can vary as well. Some places, and I've spent a lot of time in various departments, and having some performance indicators are very long term and hard to kind of quantify, especially some of them when you're looking at health measures, for example, or economic competitive measures as those high level ones. I'm currently in a very operational department, so it's a lot of fun. I mean, as someone who has always been a bit of a number cruncher, I've always believed that, people say, yes, it is possible to lie with statistics, but I do believe that it's difficult to tell the truth without them. And so, one of the things that I'm always, when I see numbers, is the so what factor. So what does this tell us about how we're going to meet our objective? How does this, help us make decisions? Does it have any trends? And if you have indicators where it's always the same all the time, then they're not telling you very much, because there's no way of understanding what underlying drivers of performance would be. So, I think that it is an ongoing challenge to develop indicators that are meaningful. But if you do have indicators that are meaningful and do point to what's going on out there, and that have timeframes that can inform decision making, then you can get there. And I think that's part of this community needs to be careful about if this is supposed to be made for decision making, then you have to think about the temporal nature of the information you're using in a way that senior management can use. I'd also say, it varies based on well, my experience has always been that if you have a senior management team that asks for performance information and data, then the whole organization, because as public servants, we are always tilted up, will tilt that way. And more and more, I am seeing more leaders who are expecting data. And if anything, what they're finding is they're a little disappointed with what's coming up. So, you know, I think that there's work to be done, but I do not consider this a feed the beast exercise. I feel like it's a very, very important part of the decision making, but it takes work and constant attention and nurturing.
Thanks, Brian.
Art, do you allow me to do just a little add-on? Because when Paul
Sure,
talks, always made me think of one or two more things. So if I may, Paul.
Yep.
I think very correctly said by Paul, like all this aspect of our operation is so important. And what I have put on a slide when we share, you know, with the audience, because the discussion I've been having with Zelda and Stephanie in the group is also how we're going to make that better connection between our operational data and then the program outcome, correct? So, and you're right, Paul, it's sometimes often difficult, correct, to have that perfect connections, but I think this is where, you know, as analysts in our planning shop, we can, you know, look at this, do more analysis and consider the contribution, correct? Analysis that's there that help then explain, you know, some of the linkages. So, and you're right, it's not easy always to measure everything we want, but I think we have to continue to do that better connection, correct? When we look at those operations and then the outcome of our program. So this is why I really learned with our initiative this year, because we were trying to be really comprehensive, so then we can have that cohesive approach. And then again, I just want to underline the point that Paul says, like it's the you know, le côté temporal de l'information to make sure that it remains relevant, correct? Like this information we're collecting in the decision that, you know, as we said, and as the question was correctly answered, like we don't want to feed the beast, but we want to make sure that it remains relevant. So we have to continue to be agile, correct? In the collections of information, the use of it, and then the connection for the decision. Sorry.
Thanks, Anne. So next one, I see that it's a combination of comment and question that's coming up through both the Q&A and the chat lines. And that is that there are folks out there that are trying to do this kind of tracking, if you will, that you're doing. And it would be really good to be able to see and hear what other organizations are coming up with. So they're asking whether or not, this is for both of you, would you be willing to share some or even all of the performance measures that you have developed to track the outcomes in your performance measurement framework? Maybe Anne, you first.
I was going to follow the rules of Paul, so she would go first. Do you want to go first? I'm fine. That's
okay. Well, I'm happy to go first just to keep that order going. Well, I mean, I think the information we have and the Department of Results framework, I mean, it's all publicly available in terms of what our measures are. So you can definitely take a look at those. But as I was saying before, I think a lot of this exercise has made us take a closer look at them in terms of, are they actually meaningful? And you know, and that connection that Anna was talking about between like that operational data and the results that you are able to talk about. We use a lot of operational data over the last year, a lot, and we've been building the organization's capacity to collect operational data. It is used really for decision making. But it becomes a matter of how we connect that to the, I would call the so what factor for the results. I would say we're there. So I don't want to be putting SSE up as like the model. I mean, it's a new organization, still relatively new. They're still finding its way, but it's one of those things that we are going to be working on. And I think that because we are an operational department and we do collect metrics, you know, we're a little like the CRA in a way. We will be able to pull together some interesting structures. I mean, I would think of the CRA as actually a fairly mature organization when it comes to this, you know. So I would say, ask the CRA if they'll share that information with you. It may actually be better structured than ours. Maybe for us, we're happy to share what we've got, but we don't want to be overly touting. But I'd say give us a year or so, and it's going to be something to behold. Okay, à toi, Anne.
Puis c'est un petit peu le même genre d'engagement que je peux faire par rapport à ça, because again, today I wish we have it all thought through and all well done, but then it's still a work in progress. So for sure, we'll be happy to share, correct, what we have, but hear me, we're still completing, that development, because in addition to identify the measure, and I think Paul, you would agree, like we have to see whether the methodology compare, correct, and the time period, because sometimes, as you said, sometimes operationally it's easier, to develop. But then when I have various, programs, when I'm comparing one indicator to another, I'm saying, okay, am I actually measuring the right thing? But definitely correct. Even something going back when I was mentioning about, what illustrate whether we had an effective management, we even went back to look at, okay, what kind of governance actually did we create it? And how have we been reporting about or assessing our impact of those governance, on making the decision related to impact. So we're just starting, but then it's all about implementation, correct, on those aspects. Definitely in terms of the program, correct? Like we're looking at the extent whether, the provisions of services or the funds have changed, and then how has it been impacted some of the aspect of their target, correct? And then as we say in evaluation, often context matter, right? As we continue to do our service and delivery of our program, do we see a change of a trend? Because now we see that everything, or I should not say everything, but a lot of the engagement was physical, physically done, like we're going somewhere. Now a lot is happening virtually. What does that mean? Where does that impact maybe sometimes on the delivery aspect? So I think we'd be happy to share. I have Stephanie and Zelda on this call, and I'm sure that we'd be happy to engage. We have other things to do, but again, I think, and I'll keep that as a note, that in our reporting, we make a sharing of that, because I'm like you, when I go to a session like today, I'd like to see how they do. But definitely this is what we're trying to do in our second. We'll be happy to have further discussions on those aspects. Maybe, as you say, maybe a follow-up would be great. We'll continue on advancing more.
Thanks, Anne. I think this one is next is for Paul. It's a question about learning Microsoft Teams and VPNs. And the question is a clarification. Should departments be running MS Teams and VPNs simultaneously? There were some comments that there are two functions on two different platforms. And also another question here is, are there particular risks to security involved in this kind of approach?
Okay, so you're wading into the technology side, and my first disclaimer is I am, as you saw from my academic background, and I'm not a techie. I'm actually like more the performance and strategy, but in the context of the VPN. So for example, I'm actually, well, if this had been a Teams meeting, I probably would have turned off my VPN and just been on Teams, just because the reliability is a little higher. And it is secure up to protected B. It is something that that's essentially what we are, was we're kind of on a Microsoft protected B guaranteed sort of line. So, but yes, there is what it does mean is sometimes if you're on a Teams call and you're on your VPN and it's kind of choppy, you can turn off your VPN. For most departments, I think there might be a few that haven't thrown that switch, but most of them I'm pretty sure have. The Teams might actually improve for you. And I know that people have been talking about how Teams and WebEx is something sometimes uneven. That's because some departments, because it really comes out, have not thrown the split tunneling switch for WebEx, for example. And it's just a way of reducing the load on the network so that the network can perform optimally, and you can still have all that bandwidth that you need for the teleconference calls. So I hope that kind of helped explain a little bit. There's some great YouTube videos on split tunneling if you actually want to know a little bit more about it. But it is something that we are using for Teams, and it's up to protected B.
Thanks, Paul. Here's a question for Anne. And the question is, did you engage the audit function to capture particular elements such as governance in your assessment? And if yes, how did you work together? And do you have some lessons learned from that?
We've been closely working, actually, it's our audit and evaluation team, correct? Like the person who are co-leading this are from the audit and evaluation group as we're leading those testing. So we're naturally closely related. We're not yet, having them to look at this assessment at this time. But then there've been, as the various measures have been put in place, a lot of advisory services, both from the evaluation and the audit group that has been provided, correct? To the various program area, the various operational areas. So I would say that, we're getting that insight because our task team is co-chair, correct, as we do this, but not yet strictly in that aspect of auditing happening. I think the audit function, and again, it's not my area, but is also working very closely with the OEG, would be looking at more globally, the COVID effort, and naturally are, helping us to prepare to be, and as I said, more systematic and organized in our collections of information. That may be a follow-on, but I don't have all the full answer on this aspect. But for us, again, we receive this advisory function and support from both our auditing and evaluation group as we advance.
Thanks, Anne. Here's one for both of you. It combines a couple of different questions or comments more than rather questions here. And this relates to the classic challenge in our results-based management work in being able to link operations and programs to outcomes, particularly intermediate and ultimate outcomes, and to do a good job of that in the departmental results reporting, including for Parliament. The comment that's being made in a couple of cases here is, or an observation anyway, that the people don't really feel that government yet is doing a particularly good job of that. Would you care to comment, either of you, on that? And maybe in terms of your more recent work, are there things that you see that may be done that could help improve that situation, if indeed you accept that premise?
Is it my turn to jump first, Paul? Is that I can remember?
I can't remember. I think it is.
I agree. It's not a small task. And I would not say that we have discovered, the perfect solution or approach to it. I'm a strong believer that we have to continue. I mentioned, I made a reference to, I think, contribution analysis that can help, correct, to improve that path. And I think even just having, again, a solid assessment of what we have at our output level, and then continue to advance in our assessment, correct, where we're looking at more the intermediate aspect. I agree, it's not an easy path. I've been in results-based management for a few years now, and it's never easy, but I think with that collections of several indicators, looking at what we understand, assessing, what we've done, how we see things changing, the various trends that we have, and then combining this with the work of evaluations, I think then will help us to make that better assessment. So for me, I've always believed in multiple sources of information, and I'm pleased that our senior management as well look at different factors, correct, when we bring the facts to inform the decision.
Oh.
Well, that was an excellent answer. I'm not sure what more I could add to that. It is a challenge, and just because something hard doesn't make it either. It doesn't make it impossible, and doesn't make it unworthy rather. We need to be able to explain what we're doing and how what we're doing is contributing to this country and to Canadians, and sometimes, especially when it's very long-term kind of results, the narrative can be challenging. But this is where you do have the different temporal nature of the results, and I think that it does become the whole idea of what contributes to what. I mean, these are highly complex systems, and I think trying to make straight line connections to everything, people who try to do that are trying to do the impossible. I do think it's you know, you need to identify some of the key things that will drive behaviors and drive results. Then you need to understand if a trend is going in an unexpected direction, why? Because that is also part of the conversation of, you know, it's not about what did you achieve, but if you didn't achieve something or the numbers are going in a different direction, you know, that's where it's always like, well, what happened here and why? And those, you know, this is where the importance of kind of a critical look at the information and the data that's there is key, and why we're all going to have to get much better at it in order to, you know, because it's a journey, and the journey takes twists and turns, and you need to be able to explain why you took a turn or why the road changed on you. And you know, it's not easy. And I know we like longitudinal information that you can look at, but sometimes, and I'm thinking of the world of technology, where technology conversion has changed so fast and converging so quickly. I don't know if we can have long-term indicators. I mean, we would have indicators about email. Well, I'm not sure they'd be useful now. So I think that this whole notion of understand the indicators you're using, understand when exogenous factors are changing their utility, and be able to adjust. And I think it's part of the journey. I don't know if that's help, but it's at the same time, you need to be able to make decisions, and this information helps you make decisions.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm afraid we've run out of time. I can't believe it almost that we've actually run past time. So on behalf of our audience, I'd like to very much thank both you, Paul, and Anne, for your excellent presentations and your ability to field some complicated questions on the fly as well. I'd also like to thank our audience for taking time out from their busy schedules to attend this webinar. I wanted to mention a couple of things just in closing. We're very much interested in hearing your feedback about how we can improve these webinars, and also particularly what you thought about today's webinar. So you'll receive, I think electronically soon, a feedback form that you can fill out. Also, let us know what new topics you'd like to see PPX address in the future, and we'll try our very best to fulfill those expectations. Please also consider registering for the upcoming May 26, 27, 2021 PPX virtual symposium. There are many interesting speakers that you'll have the opportunity to hear from. Also, please consider joining the PPX community. It's free. And for either of these things, just go to www.ppx.ca, excuse me. Thank you, everyone, once again, and have a great day. And watch us for the next virtual webinar. Thanks and goodbye.
Merci beaucoup.